All right, hello everyone. You are listening to pixelprojectradio, the video game discussions and analysis podcast. My name is Rick, as always. My name, as always, anyway. And today we are talking about Kena, Bridge of Spirits, a 2021 PlayStation 5 game, at first PlayStation 5 game. Action-adventure, it's got some Souls in it, it's got some platforming in it, it's got some Pixar in it, arguably, actionably. That and so much more. It's going to be a great time, and part of the reason it's going to be a great time is because of my co-host who is here today, new on the show, first-timer on the show. We have got Jake from the Pre-Order Bonus podcast. How's it going, Jake? Thanks for stopping by.
Yeah, of course. Thank you so much for having me here, and I'm super excited to talk about this game in particular. Doing great. It is now, summer. I teach. The semester is over. And so I'm feeling a whole lot of freedom these days, and it's a good feeling.
That's awesome, man. I'm sure that it's well-deserved, too. Well-earned rest. I've taught at various levels, so I feel both your joy and your pain. So if you are new to the show, first of all, welcome. We are glad that you're here. The way that the show works is we are going to talk about some stuff up front, general high-level thoughts before moving into the disparate parts of the game, things like the art style, the mechanics, the music, and we're going to end with a narrative discussion. Kena is a little bit different than some of the games that we've done previously, things like Pentiment, Outer Wilds, Final Fantasy, all of those sorts of things. It's not quite like that, so it won't be as lengthy, perhaps, or perhaps not. Perhaps the conversation will take us away and move us into various areas that I could have never expected. And that would be delightful. And, of course, that would be unsurprising because Jake has done this before. So, what is Kena? As I said, it is a third-person action-adventure game. It has a deceptive Souls-like gameplay style. Deceptively difficult, I should say. Souls-like gameplay style. There are environmental platforming puzzles that make up a big part of it, and a Pixar aesthetic. Those are what I perceive anyway as the sort of idiosyncrasies that make up this game. How would you describe Kena? What did I leave out of there that you would like to tack on?
I largely agree. I think with everything in here, I would just heavily emphasize that deceptive sort of feel to it in that I think a lot of how this game showcased was that it would just be like a third-person action game. I think it being kind of launched on PlayStation maybe would dovetailed a little bit with the associations that PlayStation has right now. But yeah, no, this is exactly how I would describe it.
Cool, good. I'm glad to know that I'm not totally off base. I've said this on the show to the listeners in the past. Third-person action games, action-adventure, Souls games, they're not really my forte. I have grown, Souls games in particular, I have grown to have an appreciation of, and instead of a disdain toward, and I think that's great. More on this game and how it relates to those sorts of inspirations in a little bit. I don't want to get too ahead of myself here. Before we get into our personal histories and overall thoughts, Community Forum, if you're new to the show, this is a section of the Discord server, which is free, by the way, where you, all of those that are in there, can contribute your thoughts, opinions, feelings about the games we're talking about or about the topics, and we will read them. If you write them, they will be read. Behave yourselves with that. For Kena, we got nothing. Nobody wrote in, but that's okay. It happens sometimes. Maybe a lot of you weren't familiar with the game, and hearing today's episode will guide you in a way to whether or not this game is for you. And speaking of the game being for you or for not, let's do some personal histories and overall thoughts. Jake, what has your experience been with Kena? When did you first become aware of it? When did you first give it a try? And how do you feel about it overall?
I first saw it when it was being heavily marketed as like this awesome game for PlayStation. I want to say, if I'm remembering correctly, for PS5 specifically. Mm-hmm. I remember looking at some trailers and thinking, yeah, this is a gorgeous looking game. Just totally being blown away by the art style. At the time I didn't have a PS5, so I wasn't really thinking about it. Ironically enough, I bought Kena, when I had a PS5 later, but when it first launched for Xbox, they were running at a pretty good discount on PlayStation. And so I was like, oh, I guess this is the time to pick it up. I picked it up just not quite on a whim. I had heard some positive things about it. I had heard that, again, it was just a gorgeous game to look at, and that there was some pretty good combat. I just heard that the combat was good. I don't remember ever being familiar with how difficult the combat would be over the course of the game. So I was like, okay, you know what? This might just be a good kind of popcorn action game that I can pop in and play when I feel like it. So that was kind of my lead up into it. My overall thoughts, I'm a little torn. I think I came away liking it quite a lot, but also part of me was like, I don't know. I'm so torn. I can't totally formulate my thoughts here. I guess part of it for me was maybe expectation. I just wasn't expecting this to play out the way that it did. And so I had a little more friction with the game than I wanted from the experience. I think if you I don't know. I think that there's a better approach to playing this game than how I did. So anyway, all that out of the way, the art direction, the environments, everything that I had liked visually about the game was there. I think the combat is pretty solid, aside from a few little nitpicks and maybe a few little nitpicks with bosses. But otherwise, I think overall I could say that I liked it.
And when you say, sorry, I'm I'm already forgetting what you said because podcasters don't listen; they speak. When you say that you maybe didn't play through it in the best way, do you mean just having those expectations before coming in?
Yeah, exactly. So my expectations were that this was going to be way more laid back than it was, and then it wasn't. This is not a laid back. It's not a laid back experience, in my opinion. So it didn't work. It didn't do that for me.
Yeah, it's funny. If you type Kena and Reddit into Google, which, the latter part you have to do in 2026 if you want any real information. If you type Kena Reddit, everything you are going to see is like, is this game really that difficult? Or why is this game so difficult? And you don't expect it either because it does look like something from yesteryear's Disney Pixar. It has a very family-friendly sort of aesthetic, and it's deceptive. It's not exactly the experience you might find.
Mm-hmm. Exactly. That's how it was for me.
Overall, would you recommend this to folks that are fans of, Souls-like? Do you have any caveats for your recommendations?
Ooh, I would probably caveat some recommendations. I would say if you are interested in Souls-like and you want a shorter Souls-like experience, Kena is a good one for that. If you really want to test the waters of Souls-like games, this could be a really good one there. I still think kind of my top picks for recommending a Souls-like game would be another Crab's Treasure. I think that would probably be my top pick if you want to test the waters there. But this one, I think, because it is shorter and considerably shorter than most Souls games, if that's something that's important to you, then I would pick this one over another Crab's Treasure.
Interesting. That's not the first time I've heard that game's praises being sung. I'll have to check that out. Crab's Treasure. It looks very funny. It looks very goofy, I guess is a better way to put it.
This is, obviously, this episode's on Kena, but just a quick note about another Crab's Treasure. This is another deceptive game. I would say the first 2/3, 3/4 of this game are mostly ocean jokes, but then it gets into some pretty serious topics in a much more heavy way. I do recommend it as my number one Souls-like if you want to test out this game because it has so many different sliders when it comes to how you want to approach your, accessibility for a Souls-like game. And I think it does those masterfully. So that's really why I recommend it first.
You know what I have to say about all those ocean jokes, right? Good grief. Good grief. All
Very
right.
nice.
Anyway, now that I've exposed myself as being terribly unfunny, my personal histories with Kena, I've been adjacently aware of this game for quite some time. You see it all the time on PlayStation Plus. I think at one point it was like a free game that you could get on there. It's on sale pretty often. I ended up buying it on PC at some point when it was on discount. And since there, it's been in my library. It's been looking at me. And I actually asked you for several suggestions on what we could possibly do, what you would be interested in talking about. And Kena was one of them. And out of all of your 3, 4, however many suggestions you gave, I chose Kena. to have something that we could both enjoy. This will be interesting. This is the first game in quite a while that we've done on the show that I've come away feeling fairly negatively toward. I don't think it's a bad game. I want to get that out of the way right up front. It is a perfectly cromulent game. There's nothing about it that I find repellent. I don't think there are any like egregiously bad things about it. There are things that I don't like taste-wise, largely in the combat, but that'll be later. The two words that I continually come back to when thinking of Kena in terms of the writing, the narrative, the art style, the battles, the physics, is derivative. Are derivative and shallow. I think the team should be proud, Ember Labs, that this is their first game. I think they released the first game that is perfectly good, and I think they should be very happy about that. And I wish them nothing but success with their sequel, which has been announced. Kena 2 Scars of Kozumora, 2026. Do you know if that has a release date outside of just 2026?
I do not, and I did kind of scour the internet before coming on, so I haven't seen anything.
I hope people like it. A lot of people really like Kena, and that's great. For me, at its best points, outside of a few scenes with the admittedly quite strong visuals and compositions, a lot of my feelings from Kena came down to, this reminds me of X, and I wish I were playing that right now, or I wish I were watching that right now if we're going with Pixar. Yeah, I don't know. And I think this will be very cool to talk about, because I don't think that, I don't necessarily think that is the gospel on this game. And I am glad to be talking to somebody that feels more positively toward it, to help fill in the gaps that I maybe missed, or have a great conversation around it. So to that end, well, I was going to say, let's keep talking, but then I was like, well, I'm about to talk even more. So sorry about that, Jake, and sorry about that, listeners. But let's talk a little bit about how this game came into being. Was released in 2021, September, after a few delays, on PlayStation and PC. Epic Games exclusive first, which cued so many tomato throwings and etc. Came to Xbox, where you played it, you said, in 2024, in August. Came to Switch 2 very recently, this past March, at the time of recording, March 2026.
Yeah.
You can see the full credits on the wiki or in the credits of the game if you want to beat it. But of note, this was developed and published by Ember Lab, which is comprised primarily, created by two brothers, director Mike Greer and producer and writer Josh Greer. The design on this was done by Jacqueline Ye, composed by Jason Gallaty. And again, first game. They had done some previous animation work in things like, commercials, product placement sort of things, and their brief fame before this came in 2016 with a viral short based on The Legend of Zelda Majora's Mask titled A Terrible Fate. Have you seen this?
I have not seen this.
I made the grave mistake of not watching it before coming on to here. What is it? What made it go viral?
I would love to know.
Does it look very good? I mean, is it very cute? Is it very dark? Or is that their trick, Ember Lab, like a deceptively cute appearance with a kind of dark or otherwise antagonistic force underneath it?
It's got to be. Okay, I actually just pulled it up here. It's got 16 million views, right?
Oh my God.
And it looks gorgeous. I mean, actually, looking at this, I see this is where Kena kind of comes from in a lot of ways.
Okay. Cool. I will link that into the episode notes, along with a couple of other things I found in reading about Kena and reading about some of the inspirations behind Kena. I'll link all of that cool stuff that Jake and I have to share in the episode description, so you all can check it out. I did end up watching A Terrible Fate, which I will link in the episode description as well. Jake is right. You can totally see the style of the Kena team. And I'll be honest, I think in some ways this is more impressive from an animation standpoint than Kana. Now, I'm not an animation specialist, obviously. I am a lay person. But just on a first and second brush, it seems to me that there's more depth in a lot of the textures and the environments and the color. It's very impressive. If we do have any animation specialists, I would really love to hear your thoughts on this. What makes it so special, how it differs possibly from the animation used in Kana. It's cool stuff. Oh, and I guess I should say what it is. It's the origin story of Skull Kid. It's a tribute to Majora's Mask, showcasing Skull Kid and how he came to be in possession of the mask. Check it out. One more quick note, speaking on things I might end up linking or editing in. Like many games of this era, the early adjustment period that was when working from home became a necessity at that point. This game was originally slated to release in 2020, in September, I believe, but it was pushed back a bit to Q1 of 2021 because, again, working from home brand new on a very collaborative project like making a video game, that is extraordinarily difficult. It got pushed back even further again to September. And I have to say, too, almost universally, I support this idea. I would much rather something be delayed. I was just listening to somebody whose YouTube videos I very much like. I don't remember their name, though. They're a new addition. But they were saying how they're just not interested in the Elder Scrolls 6 anymore because it's delay. And I don't know. I always think about the feeling I get in retrospect of like, oh, I've got the game now. Why was I so mad about the delays? I would rather it come out in a state that is, that is agreeable and makes the artists proud, the creators of it proud, rather than something that makes the shareholders and the folks that are making money distributing it proud. You know what I mean? I'm totally fine with the delays.
Yeah, I'm with you there. I think I trace the history pretty well here of what Ember Labs is doing. And kind of what happened here is you have this big transition in how your workforce is operating. And that's going to cause some time to adjust. I'm not an expert on the video game industry and how it operates per se, but from what I understand is that there are a lot of moving parts. And when there's one hiccup, it ripples pretty hard into every aspect of game development. So yeah, this to me just seems same thing. And I like the way that you kind of talked to your framing there. When you're playing the game, in that moment, like playing the game, are you mad that it was delayed? I've never once thought about a delay while playing a game.
And conversely, when a game is rushed out the door and it comes out unfinished, that's the first thing folks talk about. What was the one? Maybe I'm thinking of Horizon Zero Dawn's PC port that was rushed and just totally unoptimized. But I'm sure there are many examples of the stuff getting pushed out the door real quick and then getting patched, and it's like, oh yeah, now it's fine. Cyberpunk, that's what it was. Cyberpunk's release. Just full of bugs and game breaking. It was the joke of the internet for over a year, and now you would have never known. And was that because it was rushed? I don't know. But it's when there are so many moving parts that one hiccup can cause a tidal wave. If we'll go back to the ocean puns, then these delays. I mean, it's all right. There's an infinite number of video games to play. One other thing that I have here in my notes that I will edit this in if I find new info, but I am really curious if you know anything about this. I did see some lists of some accusations that came out against Ember Labs regarding the idea of delays, specifically insofar as things like overtime and crunch, not getting proper compensation for that. Some folks, I thought I saw some folks saying they weren't compensated very well at all, and some aspersions against ideas of equity, I believe, is a phrasing that I saw. Do you know much about any of these? I didn't want to just brush them under the rug, but I didn't find anything before coming in.
No, I know very little about this, and I think you're right. From what I do remember, it probably has to do with the delays as they happen, but yeah, I haven't heard too much about this. And since then, this hasn't become like a go-to example of crunch or unfair labor practices.
That's good. I think I saw that Ember Lab responded, and apologies if I continually get that singular and plural mixed up. They both sound good to me. But I think I saw somewhere that they had released like documentation saying like, no, these accusations just aren't true, or something. If I find anything to edit in, you folks listening at home will hear this sound effect. That will indicate that future me is talking, just so we don't get our wires crossed. If future me finds anything cool about the art, music, mechanics, wants to correct something that past me in his idiocy said, that's what you'll hear. And no, this sound effect is not from Kena. I usually like to put in the sound effects that are from the games that we're talking about to keep it relevant. It just seems appropriate. But I couldn't find any from Kena that didn't have music in the background or in the foreground that were loud enough, that just didn't have other things going on. It was a little too difficult. I just couldn't find any. So I thought this was all right. But let's talk about some of the most interesting things of this game, the things that make it special. And I thought we could begin by talking about the art style and the presentation. This is the first thing folks notice. I want to hear what you have to say first, Jake. What do you think of the art direction? What did you think of it before coming in? I know that deception that you and I have both touched on a little bit has come up. Talk to us about the visuals.
Yeah, absolutely. This is one of those games. I remember when I first saw the trailer for this, I was thinking, okay, is this what the game actually looks like? Is this really what it looks like as we're seeing I'm tripping over myself, as what the trailer here is actually presenting. And yeah, I think the association directly with Pixar is super valid. If I remember correctly, that there were people in animation who had previously worked, maybe not for Disney Pixar, but maybe for Disney Pixar as well. I'm really fuzzy on those details. And yeah, so I think for me, the first thing that stood out to me was that association, particularly with Kena's face and the faces that we see in different Pixar movies. But the thing that I really loved is I love a really good looking environment. I think something that's really difficult to pull off is to have your environments look organic, but also have really strong level design, right?
Yeah.
Especially in a game like this, right, where you're going to be traversing through the wilderness more than anything. You're not going to be in a ton of interior locations. It's hard to make that level design look super organic and free flowing, right? You just need, as opposed to like if you're in the interior of a house, oftentimes the house might feel nonsensical, or you just throw a bunch of like broken furniture, or you make it very clearly known that a door is shut, and that kind of gates and determines how you're going to progress through a level. So yeah, the environment here looked just really, really fantastic to me. It is interesting though, because out of all the kind of Disney Pixar films, this one looks the most like Raya and the Last Dragon. I don't know if you're familiar with that film or not.
I'm not.
It's, it also is loosely kind of basing some of the things that it is showing or illustrating on Southeast Asian culture and mythology. So the associations there kind of make sense to some degree. Yeah, those are the two things for me. Is like, okay, I see Pixar in the faces of the rot, but also in the face of Kena. But I'm also seeing something that I find to be really stunning in the environments that feel and look pretty natural, and something that would occur naturally, not just strict level design.
Yeah, I'm glad that you mentioned the environment right up front. It is overall, it is a very pleasant and great looking game. It looks very good. No qualms there. The environment, I believe I saw Japan and Bali cited as their big influences, particularly the more mountainous, lush, verdant regions of those places. You see a lot of, I don't think there are like any actual real kanji that you could just read, but a lot of the symbols are based around kanji, based around symbols from Japan, from Bali, things like that. And maybe I'm just getting this crossed up with the animation studio Sparks, who helped a lot with the animation and with the music stuff. But I would be surprised if Vietnamese culture wasn't also a bit of an influence here too. As far as the environment goes, let's camp out here for a moment. Full of the bad jokes, man. What did you feel that? I'm asking this in such a biased way because this is how I felt. Did you feel that there was a bit of a disconnect between how sprawling the environments looked? They look amazing, lush, forests stretching for miles, rocks, riverbeds, mountains. Did you feel any conflict between that and the reality of how much you got to explore? I did feel I was trying to explore everything, and I just didn't feel like they wanted me to go everywhere I wanted to go.
No, I agree for sure. As much as I'm praising kind of the art direction for feeling and looking natural, right, and not just looking like level design, this game is pretty straightforward, point A to point B level design, right? It's interesting. I personally, kind of in my experience, because I started, I think, with the visuals. Like, that was my big hook. But then eventually I realized, no, I actually have to really figure out this combat. And so I think this is something, again, really hard to balance as a game developer, all the different, systems and how they intertwine. For me, I started looking at the environment more just through the vistas and less on what I was able to explore, just because combat just started demanding a whole lot of my attention, right? So I don't know. I wasn't paying like super close attention to that. I do think that this is a good question, no matter how biased you might feel about it, though, because you do get some really remarkable vistas, right? I'm thinking early on, one of the levels, right, you have to climb up a mountainside, a waterfall, and towards the top, you're in these like tree dwellings, right? And if you were to look back over all of the level that you have just platformed your way up to get to that spot, you still see like something incredibly gorgeous and wonderful. And it does kind of inspire you to have that Breath of the Wild moment where it's like, can I go there? I would like to go there. Like, what's between me and there? But this is like not that game, right? So it's interesting. It kind of makes me wonder, because now that the sequel's announced, from what I've seen from the sequel, it's going to play an awful lot like this game. But I would be curious to know, like, if this game, or if this studio had made a game that's kind of like the Star Wars Jedi Fallen Order, or more like Star Wars Jedi Survivor, right? Where you have hubs to explore, but maybe not like an entirely open world game. Because, and I'm, as you said, we're camping here, and I'm camping here a little bit, and I'm curious about this because these environments look so dang good. This is something I would want to explore. I would want to walk over to that hillside. I would want to check out that waterfall and kind of see what's behind the corner. It looks very inviting as it is.
That's a good idea. I haven't played. Survivor is the sequel to Fallen Order, right?
Correct.
Okay. I haven't played that one yet. It's been a long time since I played the first. That idea of them having hubs and then sort of having, several disparate areas, hubs that are smaller, but have far more attention paid to them. I think, given what they've shown they can do animation-wise with this one, with, as you said, those gorgeous vistas, the cameras, whenever you are doing those platformings and turning around to look, or when you sit down to meditate, as you're able to do at certain spots, and you get these shifting camera angles of the landscape and looking out, very scenic, very, very good looking. It's clear in this area they've got the juice to do something really special. I'm with you. I think that's a great suggestion. Great idea. Suggestion. Yeah. You hear that, Ember Lab? I think it's a great idea.
Armchair Dev Jake over here has an idea for you. No, I would say, and it would be really interesting to see, this is much more, I think, possible for the sequel. Obviously, in Bridge of Spirits, Kingdom Bridge of Spirits, they absolutely nail these lush forest, mountainous areas, and some water, places as well too, meaning like mostly rivers. I would love to see them do more in different locations as well, right? This game largely, I'm really torn on this. I think narratively, it makes sense to kind of keep this localized in terms of biomes rather than just running you through like, here, it's a plains area, here's the forest area, here's the snowy area, here's the lava area, here's the desert, instead of just kind of going through those motions, like it makes sense that this game takes place in the locations that it does and it looks the way that it does. Although I was starting to get a little tired of some of the caves after a while. I'm like, okay, I feel like I've done this cave before, Yeah. But yeah, like you said, they've got the juice. They have just absolute prowess here when it comes to environments. Like, what ones could they cook up? I'd love to see.
Yeah, I agreed. And I'm glad that you called out that connection. The narrative significance of the environment is, you could argue it's the most important narrative theme in the game. I'm not so sure that I would make that claim immediately, but it is important that it's taking place out here in these lands, as opposed to, like you said, a plains area versus a forest area, and then a mount, things like that. So I get it. Maybe they did think of it and they chose not to. I don't know. It'll be very, very interesting to see what they do with the sequel. So we both touched on the Pixar-ness of it all. I feel we should probably talk about that a little bit. That is one of the first two things within 5 minutes, 10 minutes of playing the game that I clocked was it seems extremely Pixar influenced.
Yeah.
The other one, and I don't know if this is Pixar, I went on a whole 20-minute Googling spree trying to find an answer to this. There is an animation style that I'm going to try to explain on mic for the listeners. This is going to be tough. There's an animation style and Kena does it. Everybody in Kena does it, where they talk in such a way where they move their head like in an undulating motion forward, and their mouth kind of goes off to the side like that a little bit.
Yeah.
And they shake their head a little bit. I thought I was like, is that Rankin and Bass? No, Rankin and Bass was like Rudolph, like the old school Rudolph. And then I listened to the songs from that for like 5 minutes and it was great. I cannot for the life of me remember what that's called, but that's for some reason I associate it with Pixar, and they just they do it for everything. Everybody talks like that.
I love that you brought this up because it's like one of those quirks. It's a very stylistic thing, I feel like, where it's like, okay, how do we want to stylize our characters in their facial animations and how they speak, and how do we make this recognizable, but also, I mean, when someone's speaking, you're supposed to be paying attention to them, and that, this stuff really matters, I feel like, almost on a psychological level. So I'm glad you brought that up. I couldn't give you the name for that term either, but it is something that I feel like that is utilized quite often in stories that are adjacent to Kena Bridge of Spirits, right? Where it's not subtle acting, that you would see like in more serious drama films. And I think this is part of it's details like this that kind of add to this deceptive nature of Kena, where this is something that I would associate a lot more with something that is going to be not as heavy. Yet Kena has this weird contrast where it will start talking about heavy things or in a more heavy way, which is something that I would associate, like thinking about just like facial expressions to be much more in line. I'm thinking of film now, but like with subtle acting, where so much of the acting is done by things that are seemingly uncontrollable, like the brightness of an actor's eyes when they're expressing a specific feeling or whatever it is. Here, though, I don't know. Maybe I'm not expressing myself super well here, but I do feel like that this is a good detail to point out because I feel like it figures into a list of details that kind of contribute to a specific style that is associated with Pixar.
No, I think you're expressing yourself perfectly well. Do you see that as a pro to the game's package as a whole? Like, do you think that this, I can see, for example, we're about to talk about mechanics in a second. I can see an argument that personally I think doesn't hold much weight of saying that the subversion of how it looks versus how it plays could feel like a bad joke or deceptive, some might even say. Personally, I don't think that holds much weight, but it sounds like you view all of these animation choices and visualizations as a pro, which I do as well, to be frank. So is that about right?
I would say so. I'll save most of what I'm going to say now for when we get to the narrative. I think that this story occupies kind of this awkward space between initial coming of age and like seasoned veteran. From what I gather from the story, it feels much more in line with something that you would see in the second part of a trilogy, where this is a character who has learned some things. They've done their coming of age. They've kind of they've been given this role, whether it be like the chosen one or whatever it is. But now they have to test their mettle. And so a part of me is like, the facial animations and all this stuff, it does straddle this awkward line between something that is much more lighthearted versus something that's more serious. But like I said, I'll save most of this for the narrative because I just think that there are a lot of really fantastic ideas there. I'm not sure if all these details help execute those ideas very well.
All right, pin in this part of the conversation then, doubly so because I love the comparison to the second iteration, second part of a trilogy. I think that is apt in a lot of ways. Before we get to the mechanics, let's just talk about the Rot for a second. The Rot is kind of like this game's mascot. This is, if anything is going to be actionably Pixar, I think it's this. You could have, if you would have showed me this and I hadn't known what Kena is, I would have maybe thought this was like from a new Disney Pixar movie.
Yeah.
How would you describe these little fellers?
I'm going to try really hard not to use the word adorable because it's not wrong, but I think it's, you know what I mean? It's more of a challenge for myself. The Rots are like little plant bubbles that just poof around you and are supposed to be super charming and endearing. And I think they are. They're kind of, and I use like plant bubble because I'm thinking like they have largely bubbly personalities and they do come across as quite lighthearted. Yeah, they're super cute and they're fun to collect. They're fun to get little hats for, right? It does feel a little dissonant with other things that are kind of going on here. Okay, again, I have to restrain myself. We'll get into narrative later. We will, right?
Yes.
But yeah, that's how I would describe them. They're little plant bubbles that follow you around and that you just want to, they're very squeezable, huggable critters.
With the big Disney Pixar eyes. Like that is the thing. And that's where the adorableness comes from because all of the expression of these little, I don't know, mini pillowcases with stubby little arms and legs, little koosh balls, it comes from the eyes, and they're going to be looking up at you. They're going to be, wide in delight, a little sad at some points, and they want and I do think that they are cute. I think they're adorable. It ties into a bit of like some cultural shared touchstones that I think Kena relies a little too heavily on, but they're very cute. They're adorable. Unfortunately, Jake and I didn't have the time we would have liked to go deeper into the story due to some scheduling conflicts, so I didn't touch on this later on in the episode. I did want to make a post-edit here to elaborate, though, because I think it ties into a larger deficiency of the overall writing in Kena, particularly that of the characters. Earlier, I used derivative as a descriptor for much of the design philosophy, with the two most prominent examples being the combat and the art design. The combat uses the Souls style that's become ubiquitous across gaming, maybe even to a fault, if you'll forgive me, while the art lies only a skosh away from that of earlier Pixar. It isn't a one-to-one. I would hate to be misconstrued here of accusing this team of plagiarism. That is by no means what is going on. But there is an idea I picked up from reading some literary criticism and essays regarding that of the technique of shared cultural touchstones, shared recognitions that we all have. Using these becomes a sort of technique in and of itself, and when techniques are used, they have a nasty tendency to call attention to themselves. They needn't be flawless, but when techniques aren't done in a way that serves the overall work, when they're a little clumsy, when you're overambitious and try to do something that maybe you're just not comfortable with, I know I've been there in music, especially. When that happens, attention is called to the technique, and it takes away attention from the fiction, from the piece, from the overall work. And to me, that's a little bit of what's happening here. We're getting a lot of allusions and references to a lot of DNA from Souls and from Pixar. But there isn't very much, if any, character development outside of that. It seems to rest on the laurels of these, wherein me as the viewer, as the player, I associate the gameplay with Souls. I associate the characters, the art with Pixar, with that sort of aesthetic. And that's where it sort of begins and ends. There isn't anything that is being written, that is being said, that is being designed. Well, designed maybe is the least good example here. I mean, I think they do some design decisions that are definitively Kena. But in the writing especially, there's not much that's being done to make us as viewers and players and readers care about these characters and the lore. They don't go deep enough to make Kena feel real, to make her feel realized, and to make this game, this universe, feel realized. They're trusting that our affection toward them, toward Kena, toward the rot, toward the world, will be had from the cute factor, from the Disney-esque-ness of it all. And I don't think using these shared touchstones, these shared recognitions, I don't think that's a bad thing in and of itself. Of course not. The trouble is when it's used as a crutch to eliciting those feelings. Because when that is the greatest impetus to get us as readers, as players, to care, to feel something, to feel anything, even if it's a negative feeling, when it doesn't go beyond that, when it's not crafted further, when the recognition becomes the characterization, that's when it can seem as a crutch to me. That's when it can seem hollow. This becomes much more apparent in the story later on when they begin to touch on things that are genuinely interesting thematic ideas and motifs, especially those of nature. Interesting as well whenever they start to delve into Kena's backstory, but they don't really go anywhere with it. At the end, there are a lot of threads that are maybe brushed up against and introduced, but no further attention is paid to them. And at the end, I'm left feeling that my greatest impressions from Kena were those other works of which I was reminded. To put it another way, the biggest Kena made me feel was toward other mediums, was toward other games. Dark Souls, Sekiro was toward other animation styles and companies and works like Pixar. Those were the strongest feelings I felt, were thinking about those and thinking, wow, Kena reminds me of that. As ever, of course, I don't want to be the final say on this. I would have loved to talk more about this with Jake, and I invite all of you in the Discord to continue this, to push back on it, to let me know maybe why you agree or why I might be a little bit off base. I'm open to that. You can do that in the Discord. Links are in the description. I didn't go out of my way after a certain point to look for the hats, but if I had enough, I was putting them on everything. You can get little mushrooms, little horns, little flower wreaths. It's nice. If you're a collecting type, there's plenty to do, both in terms of the hats and the rot. You're not required to collect everyone. I don't think you are.
No.
You can, do special platforming challenges, do a little bit of exploration. You can find them in these little abandoned houses, under a rock, under a log, things like that. And speaking of that collecting part, let's talk a little bit about the mechanics. I'm curious, would you say this is about right? I think you can break this game's mechanics down into two primary parts: exploration and combat. Exploration having two subsections of collecting and platforming. Is that about right?
I absolutely agree. Yeah.
So where do you want to start?
Let's start with the platforming, if you don't mind.
Yeah.
Let's see. I thought the platforming handled pretty well. I thought the challenges were handled pretty well as also. I think there's a surprising amount of timing-based platforming challenges where you would perform some type of action that's, some sort of ability that you would use outside of combat, and it would maybe put platforms into place, and then you would have they would only be there for a moment, and you'd have to skip away or cross in order to progress in the game. I was kind of surprised by the number of those, and I was also surprised just by the number of puzzles that required that. Sometimes I didn't love those. I would say that was maybe my hang up. I don't know. I feel like it's never bad, and I don't think they're like, I'm not going to say it's wholesale bad to have platforming challenges that are tied to timing. I would just say in this game, you use your bow a lot to shoot like a crystal or an icon that's going to be it's going to have a weird angle in order to hit that thing to unlock the platform. And so I felt like I was doing a lot more scrambling to get into the exact right place to hit a precise shot and then scramble to make sure that I was getting to the platforms in time to progress forward. And so just my opinion and experience with those kind of platforming challenges was that I think in essence and in design, they were fine. I think I would have appreciated just a touch more forgiveness or a little more time or a little less precision on some of those shots. So I didn't feel like I was waffling or stagnant too much in my progress. But otherwise, I think like when it comes to 3D platforming, Kina's largely got what you're going to expect from a 3D action platformer. It's not leaning too hard in this. There's not a huge movement suite that you're going to learn or memorize like you would in like just something that is a straightforward 3D platformer. So here, I thought it felt fine. This is just a small aside or note, but for the double jump, you spin in a circle, which is instead of like doing a flip or like another more dramatic jump, you spin in a circle. Is this a problem? Does this matter? No, it's like largely cosmetic. But to me, I thought, this is odd. Why are we spinning in a circle here?
Well, it does affect momentum, right? And I mean, if I had to choose something about this platforming, that is the one thing is the double jump. I mean, it's obviously required because it's platforming and they know they have made a pretty all right platforming sections throughout this game.
Yeah.
And so the double jump is required and you get it from the beginning. So no, I think you do anyway. So no harm there. But that little spin, I think maybe contributes to this like weird sense of abrupt slowing of momentum with the double jump that affects your not your vertical ability, but your horizontal ability. You know, in other platformers with double jumps that are 3D, for some reason Kingdom Hearts came to mind, which is not a great example of a 3D platformer. But the double jump's not going to affect your velocity going forward. In Kena, if you're running and you jump, you know, those physics are normal. You're jumping through the air. But when you double jump, there's an abrupt slowdown horizontally, like in terms of distance, that just always threw me for a bit of a loop. And I don't know if it was intentional. They might not have even thought of this, but it made me misjudge so many of these distances when they are timed through some of these platforming segments. It's not enough for me to say that I don't like it. It's just, it was a bit of a weird choice.
Okay. You've played it more recently than I have, and I hardly popped in, I'll be honest, to in preparation for this episode, but I think you're right? And that's what I remember is you would spin and your second jump felt much flatter, right? Like much less verticality gained as you were going. So maybe that's why they decided to make it a spin rather than a flip, because it's not adding a whole lot of height to what you're doing. But I don't know. It was just an observation that kind of stuck with me. It was like, we're going to spin rather than flip.
Yeah. As far as the platforming goes otherwise, I mean, I suppose that's really my biggest nitpick. Some of the platforming started to feel pretty samey throughout it. But also this, you know, they didn't build this as a platforming game. It's just a game that happens to have some platforming in it. And not all of it, but a decent amount is optional if you're wanting to collect the rot and the currency and the hats. So I don't know. It's fine. It's fine that it's there, but it's not what I'm going to remember come a year from now about Kena.
Yeah, I think I largely agree with that. It does what it needs to do to help with pacing, so it's not just like a boss rush or like a total combat game. I would say going back to the caves, that's where the game, not just visually, but also in terms of platforming, started to feel a little more sluggish. It's how many times do I want to spin up some rocks? How many times do I want to cross chasms? And then, I would say agree. Like it wasn't really a hindrance, right? Because I think it probably the net was more positive than negative with the platforming in this game. I was never like super frustrated, like, oh man. platforming or movement in this game is impossible. Like, I never felt anything along those lines. But yeah, some sections I was just like, okay, I'm ready to move on though.
And you had mentioned the bow and spinning the rocks. There is a puzzling aspect to this game too, mostly dealing with platforming. Not always, I guess, but mostly, wherein you can use some of the in-game weapons that you get through progressing the story, mainly your bombs, spirit bombs, and your bow and arrow that you get taught how to use. And these play a really integral role in getting through some of these puzzles and platformings. With the arrow, for example, with the bow and arrow, you can shoot rocks, flowers, etc. to activate this sort of spirit energy. These weapons that Kena has, including her main one, the staff, are all imbued with this spirit energy because she is a spirit guide, a spirit tamer of sorts. So she works with this. So when you use these weapons on identifiable obstacles in the environment that have this blue glow to them, like rocks, when you use your bomb or arrow, depending on the situation, you can change the environment. You might spin up some rocks in the air to make platforms. You might shoot a flower with the arrow and it turns functionally into a grappling hook. Traversal tools like that. From what I was reading online, people are really mixed on this. I thought they were fine. They did certainly become a bit samey. You had mentioned the time limit aspect. I don't disagree at all. However, I did abuse the heck out of the slowdown feature when you're aiming. That's an optional power-up you can get when you're aiming your bow. You can press an extra button. It slows time down. Anytime I'm using a bow in any game, I love that. I abused the heck out of that. And that was a bit helpful. But I don't know. They felt a bit samey, but there were a couple that I thought were really slick. There was one in particular where I said that out loud. I was like, oh, this is slick. Where I can't remember if you have to shoot anything with your bomb or arrow or whatever, but you get onto this pillar and you have to use the rot to move it. That's another part of solving these puzzles is you tell the rot, hey, pick this up. And then you quote unquote aim and shoot quote unquote where you want them to go. And this one puzzle, you jump on a pillar, you have to have them pick up the pillar that you're standing on, and then you tell them where to carry you. And I thought that was really neat. There weren't a ton of those, but there were just enough that I was like, I like this. I like this. Not too tough, a little samey, but I'm into it. I like it.
Yeah, I mean, I think I also agree here where it's just mostly the platforming sections that worked. It was great for pacing. There's one section, it's about the halfway point, maybe just past halfway, where it is maybe the most open hub-like area of the game where you're in this village or this farmstead,
yes.
Right? And I liked that section stood out for me for the platforming. I think at that point, or in the puzzle platforming specifically, you have a large suite of your repertoire unlocked at that point. And so I felt like with more tools disposable for the player, that means the developers get to flex a little more creativity in how they want to design the puzzles. And so that was one section that I remember I really enjoyed, just like kind of cruising around, setting things up, trying to figure out how to get over a wall or into a house or how to move, rot from one place to another. I'm glad that you brought up the rot and how you use them, because this is like, it reminded me the tiniest bit, right, of Pikmin. That's how the rot get utilized, is you have them execute certain tasks for you, and they help in the puzzle platforming in that regard.
Is it going to get like an oh my god reaction if I say I've never played Pikmin?
No, because the only one I played is Pikmin 4.
Okay. I think I've heard that one is one of the best ones, maybe?
I really enjoyed it. I had a great time with it.
Okay. The rot, for what it's worth, I think I forgot to mention this in the development. They originally, they know what they're doing with the animation. They're very good at it. They toyed around with the idea at first of making Kena an animated short, an animated series, a film, but it was the rot. It was those little fellers that made them move to the more easily immersive realm of video games. And I like the concept a lot. as you know, I've never played Pikmin, but you telling the rot to pick something up just to gain currency, that's pretty cool. And you're cleaning up the environment, which is, love to see that. Or telling the rot, hey, move this statue over here. And then that unlocks you currency or a hat or another rot feller. It's cool. Or here's something that I didn't even write down. You use them in combat too. If you're rot, it plays into the kind of cuteness of it all. When you get into a battle, the rot have this little icon at your lower left of the screen, and they look scared and with those big eyes. And if you collect enough of this currency through battle called courage, they can help you in battle. One of my favorite things to do, one of the most useful, I think, is when you have flying enemies like these annoying little moths that shoot little fire blasts at you. If your rot have enough courage, you can sick them on them, and generally it's a 1 or 2 hit KO if the rot just shoot at them. Mm-hmm. They can help, or they can bind enemies together and like distract them so you can thwack them all you want.
Yeah.
I like that a lot. That was nice.
Yeah. I guess just with the combat, it's interesting. Man,
is that where we're moving? Do you want to move?
I think we're moving to combat. Is that all right?
Let's do it. We have agreed on basically everything so far. Maybe this will be the fight. Maybe this is where we'll tussle. Let's this
combat.
Is it. Yeah. After
the combat, please. The combat in this game. There were strokes. There were moments of brilliance, I think, in this combat, and I think there are moments of brilliance with the bosses as well. Right. I think it gets uneven in its execution in some of the like multi-phase mob fights where you'd go into an area and essentially you had to take out 3 different waves of enemies before you could progress. I did not realize early on playing this game how much you would depend on your abilities. For crowd control specifically, you would get so many enemies coming. You mentioned the flying kind of moth ability or moth enemies, which were extremely frustrating. Unless you had the courage built up, unless you had unlocked kind of the right abilities in order to handle them and then other enemies simultaneously. Oftentimes when I'm playing an action-oriented video game and that has a parry, early on I will just kind of decide, okay, is this a parry game or not? If it's a parry game, then I will sit there and I will learn the parry and I will use it and it will carry me through the game. Early on in this game, I had determined that it was not a parry-focused game. And so I was like, okay, yes. I'm going to think about other things. And then I got to some bosses and some enemies, and I was like, no, this is a parry-focused game. If I want to get through some of this combat cleanly, I've got to switch my play style. So I ended up kind of, I don't know, I started down one path, and I started speccing all my abilities into this one path. And then I felt like at one point, I was like, I can't remember which boss it was, but it was one specific boss. I was like, I have to parry this thing. If I want to get out of this boss fight without spending hours at it, I'm going to have to figure out the parry. And then I made this pivot halfway through. So I don't know. For me, I think my overall thoughts were when it worked beautifully. And when I felt like I had made all the wrong decisions in my ability tree, I was like, all right, we're going to slowly plink away at this guy's health or these enemies because I don't think my abilities are going to work for me here.
Yeah, okay. So regrettably, we do agree mostly here as well. Just, jokes aside. I'm glad that you brought up the hordes. One of the first things you had mentioned to me when I had just mentioned, offhandedly, I've heard this is difficult. And you said, consider crowd control. So I had that in the back of my mind. And that's 100% accurate. Not crowd control. Throwing hordes at you is something this game does a lot. And, caveat on full display here. I am not, Souls third-person action. That's not my forte. To me, the most difficult parts were the hordes, just having to focus my attention everywhere. It feels like an artificial difficulty enhancer, not dissimilar to just making something a bullet sponge, wherein the challenge is not at all integrated with the gameplay. It's just something added that sort of bulks everything out, if that makes sense. It nothing about the bosses up to a point felt like my skill was being challenged so much as just my eyes knowing where to be, which itself is
Yeah.
in and of itself that is a valid way to challenge somebody. But for this kind of game, this Souls-like kind of game that wants you to focus on learning patterns and learning timings and learning hitboxes and hurtboxes, I do feel like the hordes are a bit of a cheap way to influence. I don't know if you know, I'm starting to talk like Kina a little bit with my mouth movements. I don't know. I might be off base, but I did have that thought several times. Like, this is only difficult because they're just populating the screen.
Yeah. I'm going to try to keep, I have many thoughts on this topic. I'm going to try to keep them succinct, right?
No, the floor is yours, man.
Something that matters a lot to me in video games, especially ones with really quick movement or just a lot of enemies, is what I understand to be information saturation. This is actually a term I learned from my dad, who's a pilot. And then the notion here is that when you have a lot of different things on a dash blinking at you, providing you lots of information, it's easy for your brain just to see it all as one big blur and not focus on any one piece of information as it's needed. And so this is a skill or something you have to cope with, as he's explained it in aviation. And I feel like in video games, you need to have really good signaling and just audio cues, visual cues, but arranged in such a way that if you're going to bombard me with a ton of enemies or something that I need to do like with lightning quick reflexes, I have to be able to process that information and then respond, right? This is why for a game like Kina, for me, crowd control is so important, because it helps, it gives me player agency to reduce the information saturation that's on screen. And so all of this to say that, again, I mostly agree with what you're saying here, where I felt like with some of these mob fights, I felt like I had just spec'd maybe wrong or whatever it was. I didn't always feel like I had the tools to kind of handle the information saturation of all these different enemies attacking me in different ways and requiring different responses on my part in order to navigate all of those fights. And so there's one fight in particular, I couldn't tell you exactly where it is in the game, but it's about 3/4 of the way into the game, where I remember it was this, wave-based room, and I just kept getting hung up on a few enemies that I could not do. I couldn't damage. I couldn't really even get near them, it felt like, because they kept teleporting away while I'm getting chased by smaller enemies. And it just felt like, okay, what am I doing here? I feel like the enemies are not allowing me space to breathe in order to even process who I need to respond to first and how I need to attack them. I think bosses, on the other hand, aside from ones that I felt like I just had to really figure out the parry timing, I felt like that they were telegraphed well, that all the information that was being thrown at me was much more streamlined, and I was able to sort of process what was going on. But yeah, there were a few bottleneck, hordes that I was like, okay, I need to sit down, let my brain settle, and then come back into this and come up with a new plan.
That's well observed. I wonder then, would you say that this is maybe at least somewhat close to the truth then, that maybe they're weighing their own battle philosophy scales on like the soul side of it, like tells, timing, etc., and the more, for lack of a better term, shoot 'em up style, like hordes, visual awareness? Do you think maybe those scales are just maybe a little too unbalanced?
I would say that they're a little off. One thing I will say about Souls games, and I'm thinking games specifically from Software, is that if you are in a scenario where you are completely overwhelmed by enemies, it's likely that you are missing some sort of environmental cue or shortcut to get the upper hand on that room. And this is something I think that From Software does especially well, is very rarely, if ever, are you left in a room with wave-based combat. But you could be in a room with an overwhelming amount of enemies, and there is an expectation that you will run past some of them, and that you will be able to find a clear path, or make a clear path, that you will be able to scale down the number of enemies that you have engaged simultaneously. And I think in Kina and other Souls-likes, one of the reasons why it's really tough to hit that standard that From Software has set in their games, and I'm not even talking bosses, but I'm just talking like outside of boss fights, they do allow for some sort of path in which you can minimize how many enemies you are engaging simultaneously, and then it can be much more manageable. Part of the fun for somebody like me is, okay, what's that path? How do I figure out how do I get through this area that's completely overrun with enemies? What tools do I have at my disposal to minimize who I'm actually up against? And I can try to make the fight as fair as possible.
You know, what's funny, hearing you explain it like that is it almost makes it sound like a core design element of a Souls game, at least it's From's iteration of it, you know, being the granddaddies of it,
right,
is not just challenging the player mechanically, but challenging their conception of what it means to play a game, you know, not being tied to the idea of I have to beat every enemy that's thrown at me because honor, and that means I'm good. It's like, no, you have to challenge that part of you and think smarter, not harder, you know, work smarter, work smarter, not harder. I love that. I don't think Kina did that very well, though.
I don't think Kina did either. And that's kind of one of those elements to me that, like, what makes a Souls-like, obviously, like, bonfire-like checkpoints, bosses that are really difficult with telegraphed, you know, moves or whatever it is. Part of that for me, too, is in so many From Software games, you need to determine, when am I just going to sprint? How is that the best way to get through it? And sometimes you'll go from one bonfire to another. You'll sprint through most of it. You'll stop at that second bonfire. That's when you turn around and you're like, okay, now I'm going to explore this area. Now I'm going to see maybe what I was missing, if there are any secrets or whatever it is. No, and I think Kina, in that way, it is balancing that aspect of a Souls-like game design with action RPG, like you said, like kind of shoot 'em up or like old shooter styles where they just throw a ton of enemies at you. It's funny because I recently just finished Mouse PI for Hire, which is absolutely a boomer shooter because that term is caught on. Anyway, but you are the overwhelming force of power in that room, despite there be dozens of enemies. Kina has this weird halfway point where it's a Souls-like in terms of its difficulty and how enemies are telegraphed and how they're attacking you, but it just hucks a ton of enemies in a room with you, and there's no clear path to try to be smart or super intelligent, I feel like, about how you're navigating it. It's much more, it comes down to, oh, do I have the right abilities queued up? And that's where the player intelligence comes into play. Is it like, am I using these abilities in the right moments on the right enemies versus can I actually find a path to victory in this room that is logical and repeatable?
Okay. I think that is, I'm glad that I have someone like you here to speak with me about this that is more familiar with Souls games. You know, I don't think that I would necessarily retract what I said earlier, that it does feel derivative of most of its inspirations, Souls being a big one. But hearing from somebody that is far more intimate with the genre, it's maybe more of a case of yes, comma, but, rather than just yes, period. It sounds like to me.
Yeah, I guess to try to summarize or make my thoughts a little shorter here, because I tend to be long-winded. I feel like in Kina, when you're in the combat encounters, for me, it was like, okay, I need to make sure I got the right abilities set up. Otherwise, I'm going to be stuck here, plinking away at enemies, trying to figure out how to manage everything, and I don't feel like I have the tools for it. And that, to me, feels more like a non-Souls action RPG game. A third-person action game, you have your abilities and you fight the enemies and then you move on, right? And so, I don't know. Sorry, I have a tendency to do this. I'm mentioning another game, but this to me, the combat feels more akin, like outside of bosses, just to clarify, we're still talking outside of bosses. It feels a little more akin to me to something like Final Fantasy 16, where in Final Fantasy 16, like your sword does nothing. It's all about your abilities to do damage and to set up so that you can actually overcome a room. And I feel like Kina's combat skews towards that.
Yeah, it's been a minute. I don't quite remember how that felt in Final Fantasy, but I am sure that is not off base at all.
That's my problem with bringing in 1,000 games at once, is like, do you happen to have the same dozen games fresh in your mind like I do? If not, then I'm just...
Well, speaking of combat, though, I did want to touch on this a little bit, because for the longest time playing this game, I could not figure out why the combat specifically just felt so bad to me. I knew it did not feel good to play, and I couldn't figure it out. I was racking my brain, and the best I can come up with, and I have no idea if this is accurate, is that there's something about the consistency from moving, walking, jumping, running, and hurling your weapon that feels off. The time from actuating a button press to the time of your hitbox connecting with the enemy's hurtbox, it feels to me like that's almost lopsided, and there's like a sudden acceleration. Like it starts slow and then there's an acceleration and you hit. And that happens with the enemies too, by the way, not just Kina. It's also how the enemies rush you and charge, like with their attacks, that made it feel, I don't know, it made it feel not conducive to judging some of these patterns and parry windows and things like that. The parry, which by the way, we don't have to sit on this, but I just want to get it out. Give the parry button its own button. Don't put it with this shield. That drives me nuts. Don't do that. Like, give it one button, LB, parry button, or whatever. Make whatever button. Just don't complicate it, man. Anyway. But does that make any sense at all? Like it feels like the acceleration of movement is it's weird in some way that made some of these timings feel. It felt like I wasn't trained for this, and there could be a counter argument saying like, well, that means you have to learn Kina, the game. And sure, I mean, you could say that about just about anything, but at the same time, everything else about the way Kina moves, with the, double jumping not being in real life aside, everything else feels totally normal and natural. It's just the combat swings. I don't know. Am I touching on something that I just can't explain, not being familiar with like Souls games?
I mean, I think part of what you're getting at is like telegraphing attacks, like when exactly and how is an attack going to land, right? But also what I noticed, and I think we're talking about the same thing here, correct me if I'm off here, but I feel like when you swing your staff, it has the slightest rubber effect. You know what I mean? It doesn't swing like a stick in one motion, but like it bends a little bit by your hands, and then the tip of the spear or the staff will hit just a half second behind. And so I feel like part of that is an animation thing. I loved the sound design in combat because I love that woody thwacking noise that would, I thought that was really fantastic. But I did notice something similar, and I was wondering if that was a stylistic choice because I felt like the animation kind of operated that way, or if it was something else.
I actually, you know what? I actually think that is exactly what I was noticing now that you say it like that. I think maybe it is an animation thing. Something about it though. Like I actually re-downloaded, you and I, just behind the curtain stuff. You and I had originally talked about Sekiro, and about 10 hours later, in a moment of pure frustration, I was like, I'm sorry, man, I can't do that. And I regret that for what it's worth, but I re-downloaded it, and I downloaded, I'm playing through Stellar Blade as well. I re-downloaded Sekiro. There was something else that I'm just losing that I can't remember what I downloaded, but I wanted to feel other systems like, what is it about this? And maybe that's exactly it. Maybe it's the animation. Maybe the animation is tuned in a more Pixar style that's just not conducive, for lack of a better word. That's just not conducive to something like a Souls game. Maybe that's it. Maybe those are just ever so slightly misaligned.
I would say, I can't perfectly diagnose this, but that would be my assumption. That was something that I just had to get used to. And I think that's one of those contributing factors that led me to, all right, I have got to make this a game where I learn the parry, because I am not reading these timings well. And so I'm going to sit down and utilize the mechanic that really forces me to understand the timing here.
Man, I'm I'm so glad that you called that out. That I think that might be the ticket.
I hope so.
Yes, as we said, I do think we should maybe move on to music and sound, especially given that you just mentioned that you like a lot of it. As we said, the deception part of it does get a bit difficult. Whether or not you like their style and philosophy of creating difficulty aside, it is not as easy breezy as the Rot's little cute eyes might make you think. it can get pretty challenging. And I think Jake's advice is spot on. Crowd control is your best friend. You should take advantage of it. So let's talk music and sound real quick. Gallaty, the composer, Gallaty, was heavily inspired by gamelan music, gamelan is an Indonesian sort of percussion-based ensemble, and this soundtrack is going to have a lot of that. And that's when I think it's at its best. There was one track, actually I think it's the final boss track, that is really heavy on low brass, especially just this Wagnerian powerhouse host blasting low brass. Really, really good. But aside from that, the more orchestral things felt significantly more like backdrops or just cue music. The percussion stuff is where it really shines. You get, and here in this score and in gamelan music too, percussion is used both pitched and non-pitched. What that means is non-pitched percussion, think of a snare drum. Snare drums do technically have pitches. There's a little bar fact that you can use next time you're chatting up a nice lady or fella. They do have pitches, and you do tune them, but they're not pitched as we know it. You can't sing a note. Pitched percussion, like marimba, for example, vibraphone, xylophone, they do. Gamelan has a lot of that. I don't know the specific instruments offhand, but it has a very strong articulation, very striking, and that style of music, from what I've heard as a very, very lay person, is very rhythmically driven. There are melodies. There are definitely melodies, but it's very focused on rhythmic cells and patterns, and that's what gives them the sort of the sort of progression forward, not chord progressions. To that end, Gallaty actually worked with this gamelan group, Gamelan Kudamani. It's a C with a little squiggly tail off the bottom, Cudamani. They helped with their composition and recording. What I love about this, there are two things. At first, they asked, and one of the folks in the gamelan ensemble said this. They said, quote, "I'll be totally honest. I told the guys this, but my first reaction was like, no." Saraswati was their name. They go on. They say, "No gamelan in video games. Dewa and I are traditional artists, right? So this gets into more complex problems, but sometimes there's a sense from traditional artists that things like video games are things that we're working against all the time." That's the end of the quote. I love that. I understand it. Don't get me wrong. I think that's antiquated thinking, but I get it. He goes on to say, Saraswati does, "I was like, oh wait, this sounds kind of cool. I very quickly realized that I had my own prejudice that I was working with, and that I needed to allow this team to explain what they were doing. The themes are so beautiful and resonant with our culture and our values and philosophy, and it's exciting to see that." End quote. I think that's a very cool little package and something to put in one of these interviews. I'll link it into the notes. I don't even know what I want to ask you to respond to there, because I just kind of went off for a little bit, but a lot of cool stuff.
I mean, it is very cool. And I love the quotes that you pulled here, because this is really tricky in, all art, right? If you are interested in the artistic practices or mediums or whatever it is, the art just generally of a culture that is not yours, what's the correct way to represent or include that in a way that doesn't feel like it's diminishing or otherizing that culture's art? You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. And so I love that this is like a conversation here, and that people from both sides, they have to kind of negotiate and understand, like, okay, what is this music doing in this video game? Is it something that's representative? Is it uplifting? Is it pointing towards, different cultural practices and musical stylings? Or is it something that is, bastardizing, colonizing, taking advantage of something that sounds different and exotifying it? So, I mean, it's a super tough balance. And I just love that, like, as something, it's very easy for a player like me, who's pretty unfamiliar with the cultures that are being drawn from here, to listen to this, be like, oh, this sounds like something new. This sounds really cool, right? And which I don't think is like a bad reaction necessarily, but the packaging absolutely matters in terms of if you're making a video game that is borrowing from a culture that you are new to or one that you respect and really like, but maybe don't have the talent to, replicate. I mean, that's a pretty hefty responsibility to have on your shoulders.
That is such a perfect segue into the next quote that I pulled here too. To their credit, Gallaty and Mike Greer, they both traveled to Bali to record with this group. Like, they wanted to make sure they did this right, not bastardize it, like you said. And this group, Kudamani's founding director, Dewa Putu Barata, they worked together. They created original composition based on footage and descriptions. And when Gallaty himself presented samples of sacred music, Barata would work with them, and if it was inappropriate, they would work together to create something with a similar feeling. For example, one of the things that I pulled here, Gallaty was inspired by an Indonesian funeral chant. And once they discovered like what its origin was, Susilo and Barata used it as an inspiration for a new piece, not wanting to disrespect the origins of it. That is, like, you could not have gone about this in a better way. That is perfect.
Yeah, I totally agree. That to me seems like, okay, this is something that we admire, but we want to be respectful of. It can be a cool opportunity for players who, like me, I'm familiar with where this music comes from, to suddenly take an interest and learn more about it as well. So yeah, I think that's handled incredibly well. I love the sensitivity in there.
What about the soundtrack as a whole? Like, did you enjoy it? Were there any standout pieces or even sections for you?
I think I enjoyed it. This tends to happen when I get really keyed into a combat-oriented game, like with bosses. Sometimes I'm listening harder for audio cues than I am to the music. And so actually, in fact, with Kina, I did go into the settings and I turned the music lower so I could pay better attention to the audio cues and perform better in combat. So I regret to say that, like, I have pretty superficial memories of what I was listening to in this game, but I do remember, and I agree with what you're saying here, like the percussion in here to me, again, I think they achieved what they were going for. It sounded different, it sounded cool, and it was a different way than I'm used to, just like feeling kind of this adrenaline rush of what's going on. So I really enjoyed it, but I couldn't point out any favorite tracks.
There's a former colleague of mine in the Discord server. His name is Matt, who is a percussionist. And I'm wondering if Matt could maybe listen to the soundtrack, or if he's played the game and share some thoughts. Because I don't want to say like, oh yeah, it's steel drums, because I know it's more complicated than that. It's probably an Indonesian specific instrument, like a folk style instrument. There is much more to gamelan music than you might expect, and I would hate to do it a disservice as a layperson just reading sources from the internet. So I don't want to get too in the weeds with this and take the chance of misrepresenting a culture's music, especially a music that I've become quite fond of. What I can say is this: from what I've read, there are two major types of gamelan music, that from Java and Bali. They're going to have slightly different instruments, but by and large, it is still all going to be pitched percussion, struck percussion instruments that produce a pitch of some sort. And these aren't the struck percussion, the pitched percussion that you're going to find in a typical orchestra or any Western ensemble. And credit where it's due too, this is one of the better Wikipedia pages that I've stumbled across, which is something that you find a lot in ethnomusicology. I've found it's not going to be edited just by some Joe Sixpack like me in his bedroom on his laptop. You're going to see a lot of passionate experts talking about this. To that end, you can see a lot of the pictures of these instruments as well. The struck percussion instruments like the kenong and bonong and demong, likely mispronounced by me, and I apologize about that, as well as some that look more percussive in nature and less focused on pitch, things like gongs of different sizes and types, something called a klenong, a kendong sort of drum. It's very, very fascinating, and I highly recommend checking out some of this gamelan music. It's very available on YouTube, and if you're in the States, there are even ensembles, some that are affiliated with universities that have an online presence. California in particular has a couple. The LA Phil has a page for Gamelan Merdu Kumala, which is a sort of community ensemble. It's fascinating stuff. I'm going to put a link to a performance that I particularly enjoyed in the episode description for you to check out if you're interested. But if you type gamelan into YouTube and just listen to any smattering of things, it doesn't sound dissimilar from Kina at all, which to me, as somebody not familiar with that style or that culture, it tells me one of two things. It either tells me that I just happened to check bad examples, or, which is the actual case, this team compositionally did everything right. And I'm not going to lie to you. I'm not going to lie to you, Jake. At first, I wasn't crazy about it. I was like, whatever. But the more I listened to it outside of the game, I'm thinking I like this a lot.
Yeah, very cool. And
that's not to dismiss, by the way, the sound design of like the thwacking and the voice acting too. We're going to talk about writing here in a second. I'm not crazy about that. The voice acting, though, it's perfectly good. It's perfectly fine, especially given that they were all doing this for the first time remotely. Very, very good. The combat is pretty satisfying sound-wise. So you rely a lot on sound cues, you said.
I do. That's something I learned about myself in combat-oriented games, is that I rely quite a lot on sound cues.
Interesting. I'm not going to lie. I don't remember a lot of sound cues playing into my experience here. And to be fair, I'm much more visual. I'm looking for like their, swing backs before they swing at you. Did I miss a lot of that?
I mean, that's it. I don't often turn down the music just so I can hear the audio cues better, but I did do it for this game. So it might just be that they were a little more subtle than typically is common.
Hey, there's nothing wrong with that too. I mean, different learning styles for everybody. A game that can do all of them in such a way that promotes success no matter who's playing it, all the better.
Yeah.
Okay, so we're at the very end here. We're going to talk holistically about the narrative, the plot. Those are technically separate, by the way, for all you listening. The writing, the play experience. As a whole, this game isn't like your Clair Obscurs. It's not that kind of plot beat-driven game. For the bulk of this game, in fact, you are sort of dealing, the bulk of this game anyway, you are dealing with these two different people and their spirits and their pasts. That does not progress the plot at all, the story at all. But you are getting glimpses into the past of what happened in these people's lives. So to that end, this isn't typical. We're just going to talk about everything as a whole. Kina is a spirit guide, and her mission here, just as her father did before her, she is going through and helping these spirits of this village move on. Their spirits are hanging back because they feel unfulfilled, they feel grief, they feel regret at how their life ended and the circumstances around it, feeling like they could have or should have done more. Grief, I would say, regret, is one of the two primary themes in this game, along with that of environmentalism. Specifically, humans' impact on environmentalism are two of the thematic ideas in this game that are present. Maybe this is where you and I might disagree. This is where I felt the game was at its weakest. The dialogue writing I didn't feel was very strong, but it felt to me like they're touching on interesting things. I thought for a very long time in this game, the thesis was going to be that the environment doesn't have a moral compass. Nature doesn't have a moral compass. So what you perceive as hostility from it, from the land fighting against you, that is only through your own lens. And this is really just how the ecosystem of nature works. This is the natural process, which the main antagonist is explicitly told in this game. He is told that. Mm-hmm. However, when you turn then and sort of have your confrontation with him, the resolution functionally becomes, just as it is with the other two throughout the game, Kina saying, you don't have to feel grief. It's okay. You can move on. And it felt like they had something to say. They knew what they wanted to say. They just didn't go deep into it. And pulling that pin back out, by the way, of this feeling like the second in a trilogy, I can see that, and I totally agree. But to that end, it didn't feel like they did the necessary character work to make these characters come alive. It felt through a lot of this to me like the characters weren't characters. They were just vehicles for the writing information that the writers wanted to put into our brains, which is a sin in fiction. that to me, and look, if you enjoy this narrative, listeners, if you enjoy this narrative, Jake, I am not telling you you're wrong, but I am also very, very consciously trying not to use the phrase "this isn't for me," because it's too much of a crutch. I think, and I think that the writing, the story, has seeds in it that were just not fertilized or planted. That's just how I felt throughout it.
Yeah, no, I would say, yeah, second in a trilogy, and which is, I think, a bold and can be a really interesting way to start a story. I mean, if you could start a story without having to do the coming of age exposition of why Kina is the spirit guide that she is, and you can launch us into a story where she is refining that practice, like, that could be really fertile, no pun intended, I guess, territory to develop, like how characterization happens in this game. And I think that there's absolutely an attempt at really strong characterization of Kina. What I admired about her as a character was that it seemed like she didn't have to deal with kind of like the immature brush it off, yeah, I'm kind of a chosen one. Like, she didn't need to be humbled at some point. Something that really bothers me in the current trend of a lot of popular stories across whatever medium, whether it be like novels or games or movies, is that you have this brash, know-it-all protagonist that's highly skilled for whatever reason, and they don't actually learn humility. They just learn that they need to talk less, and people will like them more. I find that to be a really frustrating protagonist, because I think with good characterization, and this is what I tell my students too, a sign of good characterization is when you have a character that meets a plot event and they have a clear decision about how they want to handle that, and whether they're going to allow that plot event to fundamentally change how they view the world, what their motives are, and what their goals are moving forward. In my opinion, you can have a character that runs into these moments of change and opportunity through plot events, and they can choose never to change. Every time they're like, I'm not going to change. And that character doesn't have to be one-dimensional. You just have a character that's choosing and resisting opportunities of change and growth. And I think that makes for some interesting characters, right? It's frustrating, though, when you have characters that simply are, devices of exposition, or they come into these plot events and they turn to somebody else and they say, okay, well, what should we do? And then I'm just going to follow the leader here. For me, that's poor characterization and bad writing, because you don't give them opportunities to really do much. I think with Kina, a lot of that story has happened before this game begins, but that doesn't mean that shouldn't continue to happen in this game. And so I think my biggest hangups when it comes to the writing and the plot and kind of how this game progresses is that Kina doesn't really get to confront any scenario that allows her to have any pivotal decision making in who she is and what she wants to be as a spiritual guide. But rather, we have a very limited cast of characters. I kind of anticipated there to be much more. And she is commentating more on what these other people are doing, rather than us being able to see character growth in her. So I liked her. I wanted to root for her. She wasn't this annoying, brash protagonist that needed to be humbled, but at the same time, her characterization was stalled.
And to that end, too, if I were one of your students and you gave that explanation to me of character motivation, which is a good explanation, my immediate question back to you would be, well, one, it does in this game, Kina is functionally just being told to find the 3 MacGuffins, the 3 relics for each of the spirits she's helping by, not Rusu, who's the old man, Zaju?
Sator, no.
Toshi's the leader. Rusu is the one that gives you the bow.
Yes.
And it's Zaju, right? The old guy. The village elder.
Yes.
She's being told what to do by him, and in some respects too, the spirits like Hana, are helping as well. My question to you then would be, if that's the case, it doesn't seem like Kina is making very many choices at all. And to be honest with you, I couldn't tell you a single character in this game outside of maybe Benny and Saya, the two Pixar children that you meet in the beginning of the game, that really set the bar for me, and nobody else met it. I don't think many characters in this game have a personality. Even they're drawing on these connections, like a father. We've all lost a family member or know somebody that has. And that's a shared connection. But I don't know anything about Kina or how she felt about her family. I just know that she's here. I just know that she's doing this. And I know that this is her job because it was her father's job. And that's, she loves her father. Same thing, to a different extent. We don't have to go through every single character, but I don't know. I think I like what you said about these characters having, they have to move forward intentionally through the plot, through their own devices. But it felt to me like the person making those decisions were the writers through the mouthpiece of the characters, and me as the player, just because that's what you do. Like you move forward.
Yeah, if I remember correctly, I want to say that the woodsmith, and I just double checked her name, Adira,
yes,
probably has the most fleshed out personhood. I felt like that was a story that we understand her grief and why she won't move on and kind of what has happened to her. I think with Kina, it would have been, rather than us being peppered with a ton of flashbacks about who she was, I honestly think a little bit of monologuing would have gone in a good way. And not monologuing kind of in the signposting way that I see a lot of people get bothered about, like, oh, we should do this thing next. But monologuing in terms of like when she's encountering these spirits, how she feels that she is doing at her own job. I think that would have kind of helped us get into the interior of how she understands what she's doing as a spiritual guide, maybe where she'd want to do things differently than her father. And then we could see some character growth, and maybe because the story here, there's not like really branching narrative or anything. The story happens as the story happens. It would have been interesting, especially for something that feels like the second in a trilogy, for her to reflect on what she thinks she is doing correctly. She starts to do this, I feel like, towards the end of the game with the main antagonist. She starts, but for me, that was way too late in order for us to get a really strong characterization of Kina as a character. So I think my feelings on her as a character are like, there's so much there that I do admire and I really want to love, but it was way too slow in developing. And then, like I said, there's a small cast, and it's hard for me to really figure out what I think each cast member contributed to this main story, which I thought would be the main story of Kina. Kind of, she is a spirit guide. There's no question about this. She doesn't have to pass some sort of, rite of passage to become this spirit guide. Like, that's it. She's done that already. But I would have loved to see more moments for her to refine that.
I agree. Well, yes, I agree on both of the points there. With the monologuing, this isn't a novel, so we can't read her internal thoughts. And if they're not going to show us that in some way in the game, it's got to be done through spoken dialogue, and there aren't any other characters. I'm with you. I want to care about Kina. I want to hear why she's doing that. I want to hear why her father means so much to her. I want to hear why she feels fulfillment doing this. But we don't get that. And yes, I agree. You toward the end is where, at least from my perception, it feels like that's when they started to get comfortable and confident with what they were doing. And that's when there is this scene where there's the village elder Zaju and the chief named Toshi. Toshi is responsible for the blight and the corruption on this land because he chose to fight back against it. He didn't heed the warnings from Zaju that this was just the natural cycle of nature, and that we exist within it. We have to just move forward. He said, no, I want to fight back. That's man's folly. This is classic conflict, man versus nature. And when I got there, I was like, finally, yes, this is what I wanted the game to, yes. But they don't do anything with it. The scene is beautiful too, because he confronts the very characterization of nature in this like giant rot beast sort of thing. And he's asking, why are you doing this? And what does it do? It just turns around because it's an animal. It's nature. It doesn't have that sort of moral like compass continuity thing. It just exists. It only fights when he attacks it and it perceives it as a threat. And That's exactly what happens in nature, man. A shark doesn't attack us because it hates humans. It's like, I'm just a shark, dude. Oh, what are you? You're meat? I'm kind of hungry, you know?
Yeah.
It's like,
Yeah.
I don't know. I hope that responded to something that you were saying. I feel like I didn't. I feel like I'm just talking.
No, it did, because I think, the final moments of this game are really cool narratively. Like in what you're talking about here, like as it starts talking about what the rot actually is, and I don't know, it just, maybe a little lopsided. That final quarter of the game, we start really getting these things that would be more juicy, more interesting, much more to latch onto, I think is what I'm getting at, right? And I think this is what you're saying as well, too. You have too many characters, and the themes of grief and loss are pretty stripped down, honestly. We have these moments with the two Pixar children, right? The sort of cherubs that we're following around.
Cherubs. Yeah.
And I think I would agree with you definitely in that when it comes to grief and loss, that's where this game starts narratively. Okay. Like, it's like, okay, this is the theme we're talking about. Then it gets into the environment, and that's where it's much stronger. I would be really curious, just knowing that a sequel is coming. I'm really curious to see where they are going to handle, like, what they're going to do with the narrative. Because as a spiritual guide, she does have this profession that has her be much more focused on grief and loss. But the narrative was so much stronger with the other, secondary themes. It's like kind of like, okay, well, what are you going to do?
There is so much we could talk about here. And that in and of itself, that the game gives you ammunition with which you can speak about it and speak around life through the game, I think is valuable in and of itself. Thank you for coming on today, Jake. I really appreciate it, and especially appreciate it doubly so, triply even, because this is your first time coming. You said, yes, I would love to come, and I said I would love to have you. And because we're all about loving, I want you to tell the listeners why they should love you and love your show, the Pre-Order Bonus Podcast, that in my head I just call the Pre-Order Podcast, even though it's wrong, but I keep doing it. So please tell us about the Pre-Order Bonus Podcast, where they can find it, and what you're all about.
Well, thank you so much for having me on. This has been a while in the works, and I'm super grateful that we could sit down and make it happen. As far as Pre-Order Bonus Podcast goes, we are most active on Blue Sky, so you can find us there. Just a little fun fact about us: our show has terrible SEO because Pre-Order Bonus is associated with about 1,000 things. So, but if you go to Google and you type in Pre-Order Bonus Jacob or Pre-Order Bonus Cameron, you will find us. We're one of the top hits every time. So we're on Blue Sky. We are a podcast that you can find on all major podcasting platforms. It's pretty similar to what happens here at Pixel Project Radio, in that we talk about things in categories: the narrative, the game design. We'll talk about the art direction also, and then we'll talk about impact on the industry, where we kind of feel like a game fits within the grander scheme of things within the industry. If you like listening to me specifically, you can find me on Twitch. I stream part-time at twitch.tv/chipdip18. I also write written reviews of indie games for somanygames.co.uk. That's where you can find me.
Absolutely, and I have read some of those reviews. I can vouch for them. I think you should check them out. You can find links to all of that in the description, and in particular, too, the Pre-Order Bonus Podcast. This show, PPR, lacks industry insight pretty majorly, because it's just not something that's in my specialty or wheelhouse. So you can fill in a lot of gaps and more if you listen to the Pre-Order Bonus Podcast, which you can find linked in the description. In the episode description, you can find links to our stuff as well. You can find links to the Pixel Project Radio Discord server. It is free, and I encourage you to join. If you're feeling extra generous, if you really like the work that we're doing over here, you can check out patreon.com/pixelprojectradio. You can see what we have on offer there. If you join for free, you can see blog posts and previews of the patron exclusive episodes. Tiers above that, you can vote on patron episodes and hear them in full. You can vote on main feed episodes. We've got a couple main feed episodes chosen by the patrons coming up in Final Fantasy IV and Earthbound. And the Patreon episodes, as I said, those are exclusive to the patrons. You can hear talk on games like Grandia, like Simpsons Wrestling, like Sonic 3D Blast, 100 Line Last Defense Academy, a bunch of those things. You can hear all of that in there. But again, it's no pressure. You can also find links to our socials media. Those are going to be Blue Sky and Instagram. Those are the active places, mainly Blue Sky, but you can find links to them in there. And that about does it. Jake, thank you once again for joining. It's been a pleasure to speak with you. Thank you, listeners, for sticking around to the very end and listening to this conversation. Would love to hear your thoughts in the Discord or in the episode comments, depending on what platform you're listening on. And until then, I think we're signing off for now. Thanks once again, everybody, Jake, listeners, all. Hope you love the show today. Take care, folks.